The auction notice had been pinned to the post office bulletin board for 3 weeks before Claire Donovan finally tore it down. Her hands shook as she folded the paper into her coat pocket, not from the November cold seeping through the cracked door, but from the impossible arithmetic running through her mind. $10. That's all the county wanted for the old Merrick barn, perched somewhere in the high ridges above Thornwood Valley. $10 for land, for walls, for a roof, however broken it might be. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. She had exactly $43 to her name. The rest had vanished the way everything else had, gradually, then all at once. First David's hospital bills, then the funeral, then the apartment she couldn't afford alone, then the storage unit when she ran out of rooms to pack memories into. Now she lived in her car, a 1998 Honda with a passenger door that wouldn't lock and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. $43. $10 for the barn. $33 for... what? Gas to reach it. Food for a week if she was careful. A chance. She drove to the county assessor's office the next morning, before doubt could root itself any deeper. The clerk, a tired woman with bifocals hanging from a beaded chain, barely looked up when Claire slid the $10 bill across the counter. "Merrick property?" the woman asked, already pulling forms from a drawer that looked older than the building itself. "Yes. You know it's condemned, right? No electric, no water, no access road for the last 15 years. Forest Service says the bridge washed out in '09. Claire's throat tightened. "I know." The clerk's eyes lifted then, finally meeting hers. Something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or just the recognition of desperation in another woman's face. She stamped the papers without another word. "It's yours. God help you." The drive took 6 hours, winding through valleys where autumn had already surrendered to winter's early advance. The trees stood bare and skeletal against a sky the color of old pewter. Claire's Honda climbed higher, engine whining, until the paved road became gravel, then dirt, then 2 faint ruts disappearing into pine forest. The bridge was gone, just as the clerk had warned. Claire parked where the road ended and stared at the gap, a 15-foot chasm where a creek churned 20 feet below, swollen with snowmelt from peaks she couldn't yet see. She had a backpack, some clothes, a sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees that she'd bought at a thrift store, a flashlight, a knife, 3 cans of soup, and a loaf of bread already going stale. She crossed on foot, using a fallen log that someone, years ago, had notched with an axe to create rough footholds. The bark was slick. The water below sounded hungry. Claire didn't look down. She had stopped looking down the day she signed David's death certificate. On the far side, the forest pressed close, dense with the smell of wet earth and rotting pine needles. The trail, if it could still be called that, wound upward through stands of Douglas fir and hemlock. Her boots, worn thin at the heels, slipped on exposed roots. Twice she fell, palms scraping against stone hidden beneath leaves. After an hour, her lungs burned. After 2, her legs trembled. But she kept climbing because turning back meant the car, meant the highway, meant the endless, aimless circling she'd been doing for months. The barn appeared suddenly, as if the mountain had been hiding it until the last possible moment. It stood in a small clearing where the trees pulled back, as though even they wanted nothing to do with the structure. The wood was weathered to the color of ash, boards warped and splitting, gaps between them wide enough to see through. The roof sagged in the middle like a spine bearing too much weight for too long. One corner had collapsed entirely, spilling timber into the weeds. Claire stopped at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard. This was hers, this wreck, this ruin. She almost laughed, almost cried, did neither. Instead, she walked forward slowly, the way you approach an injured animal, uncertain if it will flee or lunge. The barn door hung by a single hinge, angled inward. She pushed it aside, metal shrieking against wood. Inside, shadows pooled thick and cold. Her flashlight beam cut through the dimness, revealing a floor of packed dirt, a loft half collapsed overhead, rusted farm tools scattered like forgotten bones. The air smelled of mildew and something older, something that made the back of her neck prickle, but it was shelter. It was hers. She dropped her backpack against the least damaged wall and sat down, back pressed to rough wood, and for the first time in 6 months, she didn't have to wonder where she would sleep that night. The exhaustion hit her all at once. Her eyes closed. The mountain held its breath around her. She woke to the sound of breathing. Not her own. Claire's eyes snapped open. The barn had darkened. Her flashlight had rolled away, beam pointing uselessly at the ceiling. She scrambled for it, fingers closing around cold metal, swinging the light toward the sound. 2 eyes reflected back at her, golden, unblinking. Her breath stopped. The creature stood just inside the broken doorway, massive and pale as the snow beginning to fall outside. A snow leopard. Impossible. Wrong. This wasn't their habitat, wasn't their range, wasn't anywhere they should be. But there it stood, ribs visible beneath thick fur, haunches trembling, starving. Claire pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The leopard didn't move. It swayed slightly, exhausted, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that felt less like hunting and more like pleading. Blood matted the fur along its shoulder. Dark, fresh. Jesus, Claire whispered. The leopard's ears flicked at the sound of her voice, but it didn't flee. It took one shaking step forward, then another, until it was fully inside the barn. Then, with a sound like wind through broken shutters, it collapsed onto the dirt floor. Claire didn't move. Couldn't. Her mind screamed at her to run, to grab her pack and disappear into the forest. But her body stayed frozen, watching the leopard's sides heave with labored breaths. She'd seen that look before. In David's eyes, those last days in the hospital. The look of a body giving up, of a spirit too tired to fight. No, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Not here. Not tonight. She had no plan, no experience, no reason to think she could do anything but watch another living thing die in front of her. But she moved anyway. Claire kept her movements slow, deliberate, narrating each action in a low voice. I'm going to my pack, just getting supplies, not going to hurt you. The leopard's eyes tracked her, wary but too weak to do more than watch. Her first aid kit was laughably inadequate. Band-aids, aspirin, gauze meant for scraped knees, not mauled predators. But she also had a water bottle, mostly full, a t-shirt she could tear into strips, the bread, which she could soak in water. She approached in increments. 5 feet. 3. 1. This close, she could see the wound clearly. A bullet graze, maybe, or barbed wire. The fur was torn, skin beneath inflamed and weeping. The leopard's breath came in shallow pants, whiskers trembling with each exhale. Claire knelt slowly. I'm going to touch you now, she whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Her fingers made contact with fur so soft it felt like touching clouds. The leopard flinched but didn't strike. She worked quickly, wetting the t-shirt strips, cleaning the wound as gently as she could. The leopard hissed once, a sound of pain rather than threat, and Claire's own eyes burned with tears she didn't understand. When the wound was as clean as she could make it, she wrapped it with gauze, hands shaking. The leopard let her, accepted her touch with a resignation that broke something inside her chest. Why did you come here? Claire asked, tying off the bandage. Why me? The leopard's eyes closed slowly, then opened again. In the dimness, Claire could have sworn she saw something in that gaze. Recognition, purpose, connection. She soaked pieces of bread in water and held them out, palm flat, the way she'd once fed horses as a child. The leopard sniffed, hesitated, then took the offering with surprising gentleness. It ate slowly, mechanically, as if remembering the concept of hunger from a great distance. Claire fed it until the bread was gone, then sat back against the wall, exhausted. The leopard lowered its head to its paws, watching her. We're quite a pair, Claire said softly. Both of us, with nowhere else to go. Outside, snow fell harder, muffling the world in white silence. Inside the broken barn, a woman and a predator who shouldn't exist together breathed the same cold air, surviving the same long night. Claire pulled her sleeping bag around her shoulders, but didn't zip it closed. She kept the flashlight on, pointed between them, creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness. The leopard's breathing eventually steadied, deepened. Claire's did the same. She didn't sleep, exactly, but she rested. And in the morning, when weak sunlight filtered through the gaps in the walls, the leopard was still there. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. Claire foraged what she could from the forest, mostly mushrooms and pine nuts, supplemented by the remaining canned soup she rationed carefully. She shared everything with the leopard, who she'd started calling Ghost, though she didn't say the name aloud. Ghost couldn't hunt. The wound was healing, but slowly, and the effort of standing for more than a few minutes left the great cat trembling. So Claire became the hunter, clumsy and unsuccessful though she was. On the 4th day, she finally caught a rabbit in a snare she'd constructed from memory and desperation. She brought it back to the barn, hands shaking from cold and something like triumph, and laid it in front of Ghost. The leopard ate. Then, for the first time, it stood and walked to where Claire sat by the remains of a small fire she'd built just outside the barn entrance. Ghost settled beside her, not touching, but close enough that Claire could feel the heat radiating from its body. "You're welcome," Claire whispered. The mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of more snow. Claire stared at the barn, really looked at it for the first time since arriving. In daylight, it seemed even more ruined. But there was something about the way it stood, stubborn against the elements, refusing to fully collapse, that she recognized. "We should probably winterize this place," she said to Ghost. "Unless you have somewhere better to be." The leopard blinked slowly. "Didn't think so." She spent the next 2 days gathering pine boughs to stuff into the worst gaps, using what little strength she had left to drag fallen branches across the collapsed corner. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something. On the 6th day, Ghost stood at the barn entrance, staring into the forest with an intensity Claire had learned to read as alertness, not fear. "What is it?" she asked, joining the leopard. Ghost turned to look at her, then back at the trees. Then it did something that made Claire's heart stutter. It stepped outside, took 5 deliberate steps toward the forest, stopped, looked back, waiting. "You want me to follow you?" Claire said, not quite believing the words even as she spoke them. Ghost's tail flicked once. Claire grabbed her coat, already too thin for the temperature. "This is insane," she muttered, following a snow leopard into the wilderness. David would have. She stopped, took a breath. David was gone. She was here, and Ghost was moving again, gliding between the trees with a grace that belied its recent injuries. Claire followed. The leopard moved with purpose, choosing a path that wound upward, away from the barn, toward the steeper ridges Claire hadn't yet explored. The snow lay deeper here, untouched, crystalline in the weak afternoon light. Ghost's paw prints were enormous, perfectly spaced. Claire stepped in them when she could, saving energy, though her lungs still burned with the altitude and exertion. They climbed for nearly an hour. Claire was about to call out, to beg for a rest, when Ghost stopped at the base of a massive rock face, sheer and grey and ancient. The leopard sat. Waited. "What?" Claire panted, hands on her knees. "What am I supposed to see?" Ghost stared at a point halfway up the rock face. Claire followed its gaze. At first, she saw nothing, just stone and shadow and the occasional scrub growing from impossible cracks. Then the light shifted, and she caught it a darkness that wasn't quite shadow, a gap, an opening, a cave. No, not a cave. The edges were too straight, too deliberate. An entrance. Claire's pulse quickened. "How do we get up there?" Ghost stood and moved along the base of the cliff, and Claire saw what she'd missed before: a narrow path, barely visible, carved or worn into the rock itself. Switchbacks climbing toward the opening. The Leopard started up without hesitation. Claire hesitated only a moment before following, her worn boots slipping on loose scree, fingers scraping stone for balance. The path was barely wide enough for one person. In places, it had crumbled away entirely, forcing her to jump small gaps that made her stomach drop. Ghost waited at each difficult section, patient as stone, watching her with those impossible, golden eyes. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Claire pulled herself up onto a narrow ledge in front of the opening. It wasn't a cave. It was a doorway, carved into the living rock, reinforced with timbers so old they'd turned black, was an entrance to something human-made, something hidden. Above the door, nearly obscured by lichen and time, were letters carved into stone. Merrick. Claire's breath caught. "This is part of the property," she whispered. "This is mine." Ghost sat beside her, utterly still, as if confirming. Her hands trembled as she approached the entrance. The door itself was long gone, leaving only darkness beyond. Claire pulled out her flashlight, thumb hesitating on the switch. Whatever was inside had been sealed away for a reason, hidden where no casual hiker would ever find it, protected not just by the mountain, but by time and isolation. "Last chance to tell me this is a bad idea," Claire said to Ghost. The Leopard stood and walked into the darkness. Claire followed. The beam of her flashlight revealed a tunnel, hand-hewn from rock, shored up with beams that somehow still held. The air was cold but dry, untouched by weather. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the mountain itself was listening. 20 feet in, the tunnel opened into a chamber. Claire stopped so suddenly she nearly dropped the flashlight. The room was perhaps 30 feet square, carved from solid stone. Along the walls, shelves had been cut into the rock itself, and on those shelves, covered in dust but clearly visible, were boxes, dozens of them. Metal boxes with latches still intact, labels faded but readable. She approached the nearest one, hands shaking. The label read, "Merrick Survey Co. Sample Core 1947. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a chunk of rock, but not ordinary rock. Even in the dim flashlight beam, she could see the veins running through it. Gold, silver, something else that caught the light and held it. Claire moved to the next box. More samples, more precious metals. The third box contained papers, deeds, assay reports, letters. She unfolded one with trembling fingers. The handwriting was old-fashioned, careful. "To whoever finds this, the survey company tried to take our mountain, said it was worthless, condemned the property so we couldn't contest the sale. But they lied. Everything we found is documented here, everything they wanted to steal. We hid it where they'd never look, in plain sight, part of the worthless barn property they were so eager to acquire. If you're reading this, you own it now. Don't let them take it again." Samuel Merrick, 1952 for. Claire sank to her knees, the paper clutched in her hands. 70 years. This had been hidden for 70 years, and she'd bought it for $10. Ghost moved beside her, pressing its warm bulk against her side, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel its presence, solid and real. Claire started to laugh, then started to cry, then did both at once, the sound echoing off stone walls that had kept secrets longer than she'd been alive. Outside, the mountain wind rose, carrying snow that would cover their tracks, hide the path, keep the secret just a little longer. Claire spent the next 2 days in the hidden chamber, documenting everything with a care born from desperation and disbelief. She used her phone, rationing its dying battery, to photograph every document, every sample label, every page of the leather-bound journals she found stacked in the corner. The Merrick family hadn't just discovered precious metals. They'd found something far more valuable: rare earth elements, minerals that, in 1947 meant little, but now, in an age of batteries and electronics and renewable energy, they were worth millions, possibly tens of millions. Samuel Merrick's journals told a story Claire recognized too well. A small family operation bullied by a larger corporation. The Cascade Mining Company had wanted the land, had sent surveyors who filed false reports, had bribed county officials to condemn the property as geologically unstable and commercially worthless. But Samuel had known. He'd hidden the proof, sealed the mine entrance, and walked away rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. The last entry, dated March 1952, was brief. "They can have the barn. Let them think they won. The mountain keeps its own secrets. Someday, someone who needs it will find what we left behind." Claire pressed her fingers to the page, feeling the indentations where Samuel's pen had pressed hard into the paper. "I need it," she whispered to the ghost of a man who died decades before she was born. "God, I need it." Ghost lay near the entrance, a pale sentinel, seemingly content to wait, while Claire unraveled 70 years of buried truth. The leopard had barely left her side since leading her here, and Claire had stopped questioning the impossibility of it. Some things, she'd learned, didn't require understanding. They only required acceptance. On the third day, she forced herself to return to the barn. Her food was nearly gone, and her phone had finally died. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out what to do with this knowledge that felt both like salvation and like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Ghost followed her down the mountain path, moving more easily now. The wound had closed cleanly, and the leopard's movements had regained their fluid grace. Soon, Claire knew, Ghost would leave, return to wherever snow leopards went when they weren't saving desperate women from their own despair. The thought created an ache in her chest she refused to examine too closely. Back at the barn, she built a fire and heated the last of her soup, sharing half with Ghost out of habit. She spread the photographs across the dirt floor, organizing them into categories: assay reports, deeds, correspondence, survey maps. The property boundaries shown in the original Merrick documents were extensive, nearly 400 acres, including the barn, the hidden mine, and most of the ridge system. But the current deed she'd been given at the county office showed only 40 acres, conveniently excluding the mineral-rich areas. Someone had redrawn the lines. Recently, Claire's jaw tightened. The condemned property sale hadn't been random. Someone knew. Someone was trying to acquire the land the same way Cascade Mining had tried 70 years ago. She was studying a survey map dated 2023. How had that gotten into a sealed chamber when Ghost's head snapped up, ears forward, body tense? Claire froze. "What is it?" The leopard rose smoothly, moving to the barn entrance, staring down the slope toward where the forest thickened. Then Claire heard it too. Voices. Men's voices, still distant but growing closer. Her heart rate spiked. She quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them into her backpack. Ghost backed into the barn, a low growl building in its chest. "Shh," Claire breathed, though she wanted to make the same sound. "We don't know they're coming here, but they were." The voices grew clearer, accompanied by the crunch of boots on frozen ground. 2 men, maybe 3, moving with purpose up the trail she'd thought was too overgrown to follow. Claire's mind raced. The car was on the other side of the washed-out bridge, miles away. The mine entrance was exposed. She'd left footprints in the snow leading directly to it, and she was alone except for an injured snow leopard in a barn with no back exit. "Told you the old Merrick place was still standing," one voice said, close enough now that Claire could hear him clearly. Male, middle-aged, casual authority in his tone. Surprised anyone actually bought it at auction. Some sucker with more hope than sense. Another voice, younger, laughed. $10 for 400 acres of prime mineral rights. County clerk must have gotten a nice bonus for keeping the description vague. Claire's blood went cold. Once we confirm the structures are genuinely uninhabitable, we file the reclamation petition. Owner defaults on improvement requirements, which they will, because who the hell can afford to renovate up here? And the land reverts to county control. Then we buy it properly, full rights, and bring the dozers in before anyone knows what we've found. The first man again. Cascade's lawyers already have the paperwork ready. We just need photos proving the barn's a safety hazard. They were closer now. Maybe 100 yards. Claire looked at Ghost. The leopard looked back, and she could have sworn she saw understanding in those golden eyes. She couldn't hide. The barn was too obvious, and the men would see the smoke from her fire, her footprints in the snow, the signs of habitation. But maybe she didn't need to hide. Maybe she needed to be seen. Claire grabbed a piece of charred wood from the fire and moved to the barn wall. In large, rough letters, she wrote, "Private property. Owner in residence. Armed." She wasn't armed, but they didn't know that. Then she stepped outside, positioning herself in front of the barn door, backpack on her shoulders, trying to look like someone who belonged here rather than someone barely surviving. Ghost moved to her side without being called. The leopard's presence beside her was both terrifying and oddly empowering. If they saw the leopard, they'd leave. They'd have to. The men emerged from the tree line, and Claire's stomach clenched. 3 of them, dressed in expensive outdoor gear, carrying cameras and survey equipment, the kind of men who were used to getting what they wanted. The first one, tall, silver-haired, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than her car, stopped short when he saw her. His eyes went wide when he saw Ghost. "What the hell?" he started. Claire cut him off, keeping her voice steady. "This is private property. You're trespassing." The silver-haired man recovered quickly, his surprise shifting to calculated charm. "Miss Donovan, I presume? I'm Richard Vance, with Cascade Mining. We weren't expecting to find anyone actually living here. And yet here I am, living here." Vance's eyes flicked to Ghost, then back to Claire. "That's a snow leopard. She's also on my property. Snow leopards aren't native to this region. That animal is either escaped from captivity or illegally possessed. Either way, I'm required to report it to Fish and Wildlife." Claire's pulse hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "Feel free to report whatever you want. After you leave my land." One of the other men, younger, with expensive sunglasses pushed up on his head, stepped forward. "Look, lady, we're just here to document the property condition. County sent us. It's standard for condemned properties. The county sold me this property. It's no longer condemned. It's mine." Vance's smile tightened. "I think you'll find the deed transfer was contingent on bringing the structures up to code within 90 days. Given the state of things." His gesture encompassed the sagging barn, the collapsed corner, the general air of ruin. "I'd say you're already in default. I have 83 days left." Claire had no idea if this was true, but she said it with conviction. "To do what? You don't have power, water, road access, or any viable means of..." Ghost growled. Low, rolling, unmistakable. All 3 men took an involuntary step back. Claire rested her hand lightly on the leopard's head, a gesture that required every ounce of courage she possessed. "I think you should go now." Vance's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Miss Donovan. That animal is a liability. This property is unsafe, and we have every legal right to leave." Claire's voice didn't rise, but something in it made even Ghost glance up at her. Now. For a long moment, nobody moved. The mountain held its breath. Then Vance jerked his head toward his companions. "Document everything," he said quietly. "We'll be back with the proper authorities." They retreated into the forest, but slowly, deliberately, making it clear they weren't fleeing but choosing to withdraw. Claire watched until they disappeared into the trees, her hand still resting on Ghost's warm fur, her legs shaking so badly she worried they'd see. When the forest finally swallowed the last of them, Claire's knees buckled. She sat down hard in the snow, breath coming in gasps. Ghost sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "They know," Claire whispered. "They know what's here. They've known all along." She thought of the survey map from 2023, the one that had somehow ended up in a chamber sealed in 1952. Someone had been inside, recently. Someone had been documenting, planning, waiting for the right moment to take what the Merricks had died protecting. And now, Claire was the only thing standing in their way. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, Ghost dozing beside her, while her mind circled the same impossible problem. She had 83 days if Vance was even telling the truth about the code requirements. 83 days to somehow legitimize her claim to land worth millions, against a company with lawyers and money and politicians in their pocket. She had no phone, no internet, no way to even research what her legal options might be. What she had was a backpack full of photographs, a starving snow leopard who shouldn't exist, and a barn that was genuinely one strong wind away from collapse. And she had the mine, the secret the mountain had kept for 70 years. Claire stood abruptly, startling Ghost awake. "I need to go back," she said aloud. "There has to be something else. Something Samuel left that I missed." Ghost stretched, yawned, then moved to the door. "Now?" Claire looked at the darkness beyond the barn. "It's the middle of the night." The leopard looked back at her, waiting. Claire grabbed her flashlight and followed. The climb to the mine entrance was treacherous in the dark, even with Ghost leading the way. Twice, Claire's feet slipped on ice-slicked rock, and only desperate grabs at stone and scrub kept her from falling. But Ghost moved with impossible confidence, as if the darkness held no terror for a creature built for hunting under starlight. Inside the chamber, Claire's flashlight beam swept across the familiar shelves, the boxes, the journals. She'd documented everything. What was she hoping to find now? She moved deeper into the chamber, toward the back wall she'd only briefly examined before. The stone here was different, smoother, as if worked more carefully. Claire ran her hands across the surface, feeling for irregularities. Her fingers caught on a seam. She angled the flashlight. Not a seam, a crack. No, a line, deliberate, carved, forming the outline of a rectangle about 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. A hidden door within a hidden chamber. Claire's heart raced. She pushed at the outlined section, but nothing moved. She ran her fingers along the edges, searching for a latch, a lever, anything. Ghost moved beside her, sniffing at the base of the outlined section. The leopard's paw scraped at a spot low on the left side. Claire knelt, directing her light where Ghost indicated. There a small hole, barely visible, the size of a finger. She pressed into it and heard a soft click. The rectangular section of wall swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Claire's breath caught. She crawled through the opening, flashlight first, into a smaller chamber beyond. This room was different. Personal. A desk made from crates, a chair, a cot with blankets still folded on it, preserved by the dry mountain air, and on the desk, a metal box smaller than the others, with a lock that had rusted away to nothing. Claire opened it with trembling hands. Inside were more papers, but these were different. Legal documents. A will. Letters addressed to whoever comes after. She pulled out the will first, dated 1952, signed by Samuel Merrick and witnessed by 2 names she didn't recognize. It was simple, direct. I, Samuel Merrick, being of sound mind, leave all rights, claims, and discoveries associated with the property known as Merrick Ridge to any person who finds this chamber and has need of what it protects. The land remembers, the mountain provides. Don't let them take it twice. Claire's hands shook as she read. This was a will, leaving everything to whoever found it, to her. But would it hold up? Was it even legal to bequeath property to an unknown person 70 years in the future? She didn't know, but she suspected Richard Vance and Cascade Mining wouldn't want to find out in court. The next document made her breath stop entirely. It was a geological survey, official letterhead from the U.S. Geological Survey, dated 1951. It documented the presence of rare earth elements on the Merrick property in quantities described as commercially significant and potentially strategic to national interests. This wasn't just valuable, it was the kind of valuable that governments cared about. The final item in the box was a letter, handwritten, addressed simply, "To you." Claire's vision blurred as she read. "If you found this, you're probably desperate. I was too, once. The mountain asks a lot of those who love it, but it gives back if you're patient. They'll come for you, the ones who want what you've found. They'll have lawyers and money and the law on their side. But you have something they don't. You have the truth, and you have time. The mountain is patient. Be patient too. Document everything. Tell everyone. Make it public before they can bury it again. And don't trust anyone who says the land is worthless. If it was worthless, they wouldn't want it so badly. Samuel." Claire sat back, the letter clutched in her hands. "Tell everyone. Make it public." But how? She had no phone, no internet, no way to contact anyone. Ghost pushed through the opening, squeezing into the small chamber, and settled beside her. The Leopard's presence was warm, solid, real. Claire looked at the documents spread before her, then at Ghost. "Samuel left instructions," she said quietly. "He knew someone would come. He knew someone would need this." Ghost's tail flicked once. "I need to get these to a lawyer, to someone who can file them properly, make them public record before Cascade can bury them." Claire's mind raced. "But that means leaving, going back to town. And if I leave, Vance's people will come back. They'll destroy the barn, claim it's a safety hazard, and I'll lose everything." She looked at the Leopard. "I can't do both. I can't protect this place and get help at the same time." Ghost stood and moved back through the opening. Claire followed, crawling out into the main chamber. The Leopard walked to the entrance, then looked back, waiting. "You want to leave?" Claire's throat tightened. "Now? After everything?" But Ghost didn't move toward the forest. Instead, the Leopard turned and walked back to Claire, pressing its massive head against her chest, a gesture so deliberate and gentle that tears sprang to Claire's eyes. Then Ghost pulled back, looked directly into her eyes, and did something Claire would never be able to explain to anyone else. The Leopard turned toward one of the metal boxes on the shelf, not the samples, but one labeled "Maps and Records, 1950. Ghost placed a paw on it, looked back at Claire, then moved to the entrance and disappeared into the darkness. Claire stood frozen for a moment, then rushed to the box. Inside were survey maps, yes, but also something else, a list of names. People Samuel Merrick had trusted, people who'd helped him hide the evidence. One name was circled in faded red ink: Thomas Reeves, attorney, Thornwood, friend. Thomas Reeves. 70 years ago, yes, but lawyers kept records. Firms persisted. If Reeves had helped Samuel, maybe his firm still existed. Maybe they still had files. Maybe they'd been waiting for someone to come forward. Claire carefully repacked the most important documents into her backpack. She left the samples, they were too heavy, and besides, they were safer here than anywhere else. But she took the will, the USGS survey, Samuel's letters, and the list of names. Outside, dawn was beginning to grey the eastern sky. Ghost was nowhere to be seen, but fresh paw prints led down the mountain, toward the trail, toward town. Leading her forward, Claire adjusted her backpack and started walking. The mine entrance, she left open. Let Vance's people find it. Let them see the empty shelves, the disturbed dust. Let them wonder what she'd already taken and where she'd hidden it. The truth, as Samuel had written, was her weapon now, and she was done hiding. The walk back to her car took most of the day. Claire's legs screamed, her feet blistered, but she kept moving, following Ghost's tracks when the trail grew uncertain. The leopard never showed itself, but Claire caught glimpses of flash of pale fur on a distant ridge, golden eyes watching from the shadows. Guardian or guide, she no longer questioned. By the time she reached the washed-out bridge, the sun was setting, turning the sky the color of blood and honey. Her car sat where she'd left it, covered in pine needles but intact. Ghost's tracks stopped at the creek's edge. Claire crossed the log bridge carefully, achingly aware of how much more dangerous it would be if she fell now, carrying everything that mattered. On the far side, she turned back. The leopard stood on the opposite bank, pale as the first snow, watching her with those impossible eyes. "Thank you," Claire called across the rushing water. "For everything." Ghost sat, blinked slowly. Then the leopard turned and vanished into the forest, silent as smoke. Claire stood for a long moment, feeling the absence like a wound. But Ghost had led her here, to this moment, to this chance. Now, the rest was up to her. She got in her car, which mercifully started on the third try, and drove toward Thornwood as the last light died behind the mountains. Thornwood was the kind of small town that still had a main street, a diner that closed at 8, and a law office in a converted Victorian house with a sign that made Claire's heart leap. Reeves and Associates, established 1947. She parked in front of the office, suddenly aware of how she must look filthy, exhausted, wild-eyed. But the lights were still on inside, and she could see a figure moving past the window. Claire grabbed her backpack and walked up the creaking porch steps. The door was unlocked. A small bell chimed as she entered. The interior was warm, lined with dark wood and older books. A woman in her 60s looked up from a desk, her expression shifting from mild surprise to concern. "We're just closing, but are you all right?" Claire's voice came out rough, scratchy from disuse and mountain air. "I need to see an attorney. About the Merrick property." The woman's expression changed entirely. She stood slowly, studying Claire with new intensity. "The Merrick property. You're the one who bought it at auction." "Yes. And Cascade Mining is trying to take it." "Of course they are." The woman moved around the desk, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret Reeves. Thomas Reeves was my grandfather. We've been waiting for you." Claire stared. "Waiting for 70 years?" Margaret smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "My grandfather made me promise. He said someday someone would find what Samuel hid, someone who needed it, someone the mountain chose. And when they came, we were to help them fight." She gestured toward a conference room. "Come, show me what you found, and then we'll make Cascade Mining regret they ever heard the name Merrick." Claire followed her, legs finally giving out as she sank into a leather chair. She pulled the documents from her backpack, spreading them across the polished table. Margaret's eyes widened as she examined each one. "My God," she whispered. "He documented everything. Can we use this? Legally?" Margaret looked up, and her expression was fierce. "Oh, we're going to do more than use it. We're going to make it public record, file it with the county, the state, the Federal Land Management Office. By tomorrow afternoon, every newspaper in the region will have copies. By next week, Cascade won't be able to bury this if they tried." She picked up the will, reading it carefully. "This is unusual, but it's legal. Samuel had no heirs, and he had the right to dispose of his property as he wished. The fact that he chose to leave it to whoever found it," she smiled. "It's valid, eccentric, but valid." "What about the 90-day code requirement?" Vance said. Vance lied. "There's no such requirement for properties purchased at auction. The deed transfer was absolute. You own it, period." Margaret's jaw tightened. "But that won't stop them from trying to intimidate you, to make you think you're in default, to pressure you into selling cheap." Claire thought of the barn, of Ghost, of Samuel's words. Don't trust anyone who says the land is worthless. I'm not selling, she said quietly. Not for any price. Margaret nodded approvingly. Good, then let's get to work. They worked through the night. Margaret called in her partner, a younger attorney named David Chen, who took one look at the USGS survey and whistled low. This is going to cause a firestorm, he said. Rare earth elements, strategic minerals, on private land that a major mining company tried to fraudulently acquire. The media is going to eat this alive. Good, Margaret said. Let them. The more public this gets, the safer Miss Donovan will be. By morning, they'd prepared filings for 3 different government agencies, drafted a press release, and contacted a journalist Margaret knew at the state newspaper who specialized in corporate malfeasance and environmental issues. Claire sat in the conference room, drinking her 4th cup of coffee, feeling like she was watching her life happen to someone else. 24 hours ago, she'd been alone in a broken barn with a dying snow leopard. Now she was at the center of what Margaret kept calling the mineral rights case of the decade. What happens next? Claire asked as the sun rose outside the windows. Margaret looked up from her laptop. We file everything this morning. By noon, it'll be public record. By evening, the story will break. Cascade will scramble to do damage control, but it'll be too late. The land is yours, documented and protected. And then you decide what you want to do with it. You could lease the mineral rights to an ethical company. You could develop it yourself. You could sell it for what it's actually worth, which is, Margaret glanced at David, conservatively, 15 to 20 million, David said. If the deposits are as rich as the USGS survey suggests. The number was so large it didn't even feel real. Claire thought of her $43, of sleeping in her car, of choosing between gas and food. I want to protect it, she heard herself say. Whatever I do, I want the land protected. No clear-cutting, no open-pit mining, no destroying the mountain to get what's underneath. Margaret smiled. We can write that into any agreement. Environmental protections, conservation easements, sustainable development requirements. Claire nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Okay, do it. The story broke that evening, exactly as Margaret predicted. Local woman uncovers decades-old mining fraud, screamed the headline. By the next morning, it had spread to regional papers, then national news. Claire's phone, which she'd finally charged at Margaret's office, wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests, offers to buy the mineral rights, and messages from people claiming to be Merrick descendants who wanted their share. Margaret fielded everything, calm and professional, while Claire sat in the office conference room and watched her life become public property. On the 3rd day, Richard Vance called. Margaret put him on speaker. Mr. Vance, I assume you're calling to apologize for attempting to defraud my client. Vance's voice was tight, controlled anger barely leashed. Your client is in possession of materials that were removed from sealed property. That's theft. The property belongs to her. She can't steal from herself. Cascade Mining has developmental rights dating back to rights obtained through fraudulent surveys and bribery, as we documented in our filing with the State Attorney General's office. Would you like to discuss that further? I believe they're very interested in talking to you. A pause. Then, what does she want? Margaret looked at Claire, eyebrows raised. Claire leaned toward the phone. I want you to leave me alone. I want you to stop trying to steal land that doesn't belong to you. And I want you to acknowledge, publicly, that Samuel Merrick was right about what he found, and that your company tried to bury that truth for 70 years. Another pause. Longer. That's not going to happen. Then we'll see you in court, Margaret said cheerfully, and hung up. Claire sagged back in her chair. He's going to make this ugly, isn't he? He's going to try, Margaret agreed. But we have the law, the evidence, and public opinion on our side. He has lawyers and money. I'll take our hand over his any day. The legal battle moved faster than Claire expected. Within 2 weeks, the State Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into Cascade Mining's land acquisition practices. Within 3, a federal agency got involved because of the strategic mineral designation, but Claire couldn't stay in town. The motel room Margaret had helped her rent felt like a cage, the walls pressing in despite being larger and warmer than her car had ever been. She missed the mountain, she missed the barn, she missed Ghost. On a grey morning in late November, Claire borrowed Margaret's truck and drove back up the mountain road. The weather had turned colder, snow falling in earnest now, blanketing the forest in white silence. When she crossed the log bridge and started up the trail, she half expected to find the barn destroyed, burned, vandalized by Cascade's people in retaliation, but it stood unchanged, sagging and stubborn, exactly as she'd left it. The fire pit was cold. Her sleeping bag still lay in the corner where she'd left it. Everything was the same except for one detail that made her breath catch: fresh paw prints in the snow, leading to the barn, then away, then back again, circling, waiting. "Ghost," Claire called softly, stepping into the clearing. Movement at the tree line. The snow leopard emerged like a pale dream, moving with that liquid grace that still seemed impossible. But something was different. Ghost looked healthy, well-fed. The ribs no longer showed. The coat was thick and lustrous. The wound completely healed. The leopard had survived, thrived, even in the weeks Claire had been gone. Relief and joy and something like grief crashed over Claire simultaneously. Ghost didn't need her anymore. The rescue was complete. The debt, if there had ever been one, was paid. Ghost approached slowly, stopping a few feet away, watching her with those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "I came back," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I don't know if you understand, but I came back." The leopard sat, tail curling around its paws. "They're trying to take it," Claire continued, needing to speak even if Ghost couldn't understand. "The land, the mountain, everything Samuel protected. But we found the proof. We're fighting them. I'm fighting them." Ghost's ears flicked forward, listening or simply acknowledging her voice in the cold air. Claire sank down onto a fallen log, suddenly exhausted despite having done nothing but drive. "Margaret says we'll win. Says the law is on our side. But Vance has lawyers and money, and he's not giving up. Yesterday his people filed a motion claiming I'm not mentally competent to own property. That living alone on a mountain with a dangerous wild animal proves I'm unstable." She laughed, the sound bitter. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am crazy. Talking to a snow leopard about property law, living in a barn that's about to collapse, fighting a corporation with more money than God." Ghost stood and walked toward her. Claire held her breath, not daring to move. The leopard came close, closer than it ever had except when wounded, and pressed its massive head against her knee. The gesture was so deliberate, so full of weight and meaning, that tears spilled down Claire's face. "Thank you," she whispered, resting her hand on Ghost's head. "For everything. For leading me here. For showing me the mine. For reminding me how to fight." They sat together in the falling snow, woman and leopard, as the mountain held its silence around them. The next morning, Claire woke to voices again. But this time, they weren't Cascade's people. She emerged from the barn to find a group of people standing in the clearing, looking uncertain and cold. A young woman with a camera, an older man with survey equipment, a middle-aged woman in an expensive parka who looked distinctly out of place. "Miss Donovan," the woman called. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from the University of Washington, Earth Sciences Department. I hope we're not intruding, but when I read about the USGS survey from 1951, I had to come see for myself." Claire blinked, still half asleep. "How did you even get up here?" Very carefully. Doctor, Chen smiled. "Your attorney, Miss Reeves, gave us permission to access the property. We'd like to conduct an updated geological survey, if you'll allow it, pro bono. The data from 1951 is fascinating, But we have much better analysis tools now. Claire looked at the small group, then back at the barn. Ghost was nowhere in sight, but she could feel the leopard's presence watching from the trees. Why would you do it for free? Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. Because what Samuel Merrick found matters, not just financially, but scientifically. If the rare earth deposits are as significant as the old survey suggests, this could change domestic supply chains, reduce dependence on foreign sources, but more than that. She gestured at the mountain around them. This is public interest science, the kind that gets buried by corporate interests. I want to make sure the truth gets documented properly this time. Claire studied her, looking for deception, for hidden agendas. But all she saw was genuine scientific excitement and something else, the same stubborn integrity she'd seen in Samuel Merrick's journals. Okay, Claire said, but you document everything, every sample, every measurement, and it all goes into public record, same as the 1951 survey. Dr. Chen grinned. Wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next week, the clearing around the barn transformed into a small research camp. Dr. Chen's team set up equipment, ran tests, took core samples from locations Claire approved. They were respectful, careful, treating the land with the reverence it deserved. And they found exactly what Samuel Merrick had documented 70 years earlier. Rare earth elements in commercially viable quantities. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, elements critical for batteries, wind turbines, electric motors. This is incredible, Dr. Chen said one evening, showing Claire the preliminary analysis. The concentrations are higher than any domestic source currently in production. If developed responsibly, this could be worth, well, more than the initial estimates suggested. Claire stared at the numbers that meant nothing to her except in the abstract. Millions, tens of millions, maybe more. How do I develop it responsibly? She asked. I don't know anything about mining. You don't have to. You lease the rights to a company with environmental standards you approve. You maintain ownership. They do the extraction. You both profit. And you write conservation protections into every contract. Dr. Chen's expression softened. You have leverage now, Claire. Real leverage. You can demand they do it right, or you don't let them do it at all. That night, alone in the barn with a fire crackling in the pit she'd dug, Claire pulled out her phone and called Margaret. I want to set up a trust, she said. For the land. Something that protects it even after I'm gone. Something that guarantees the mountain stays wild, even if they're mining underneath it. She could hear Margaret's smile through the phone. A conservation trust. Yes, absolutely. We can establish it as part of any development agreement. The land stays protected in perpetuity. And I want part of whatever money comes from this to go toward. Claire paused, thinking of Samuel Merrick, of his journals, of his fight against forces too large to overcome, toward helping other people fight corporations trying to steal their land, legal fees, expert witnesses, whatever they need. The Merrick Foundation, Margaret said softly. I think Samuel would like that. Claire's throat tightened. Yeah, I think he would. The call came on a Wednesday in early December. Margaret's voice was tight with suppressed excitement. They're settling. Cascade's offering a full settlement. Claire sat up from where she'd been lying on her sleeping bag, reading by lamplight. What? The Attorney General's investigation found evidence of bribery, fraudulent surveys, and conspiracy to defraud landowners going back decades. Not just your case, there are at least 6 other properties they acquired using similar tactics. Cascade's board is in full panic mode. They're offering to settle all claims, acknowledge wrongdoing, and pay damages. How much? For you, specifically? They're offering $2 million to make this go away quietly. $2 million. The number sat in Claire's mind like a foreign object. And if I don't take it, then we go to trial. And you'll probably win more. But it'll take years, cost a fortune in legal fees, and consume your life. Margaret paused. Or, you can take the settlement. Use it to finance responsible development of the mineral rights, and actually move forward with your life. Claire looked around the barn, at the rough walls, the dirt floor, the gaps letting in cold air and starlight. She thought of Ghost, of Samuel, of 70 years of buried truth finally seeing daylight. What would Samuel do? She asked. Margaret laughed. Samuel would tell you to take the money and use it to protect what matters. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting to make sure the mountain survived. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories like this one. Claire took a breath. Okay, I'll take the settlement, but I want them to acknowledge what they did publicly. Full disclosure, written admission, published in every paper that covered the story. Done. They've already agreed to that as part of the settlement terms, and I want a formal apology to the Merrick family. Even if there's no one left to receive it, I want it on record. Also done. Claire closed her eyes, feeling something that had been clenched tight in her chest for months finally begin to loosen. Then, yes, let's settle. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. Claire sat in Margaret's conference room, signing papers that transferred more money than she'd ever imagined having into an account she'd opened specifically for this purpose. The press release went out simultaneously. Cascade Mining admitted to historical irregularities in their land acquisition practices, acknowledged Samuel Merrick's original surveys as accurate, and issued a public apology to the Merrick family and all parties affected by past corporate misconduct. It wasn't everything. It wasn't perfect. But it was something. It was truth, acknowledged and recorded. That night, Claire drove back to the mountain. She'd brought supplies this time, real supplies. Tarps to cover the worst gaps in the barn roof, proper insulation, a wood stove someone from Dr. Chen's team had recommended, food that would last through winter. She wasn't running anymore. She was building. When she reached the clearing, Ghost was waiting. The leopard sat in the center of the space, pale against the snow, watching the trail as if it had known exactly when Claire would arrive. Claire stopped, her arms full of supplies, and just looked at the impossible creature that had saved her life in more ways than one. I'm staying, she told Ghost. Not forever, maybe. But for now, I need to figure out what comes next, and I can't do that in town. I need the mountain. Ghost stood and walked toward her, movements unhurried, deliberate. The leopard circled her once, then twice, as if inspecting her or claiming her or simply saying goodbye. Then Ghost did something that made Claire's breath stop. The leopard walked to the barn entrance, looked back once, and then turned toward the forest. Not running, not fleeing, simply leaving, with the quiet confidence of a job completed. Wait, Claire called. Ghost paused, looking back over its shoulder. Claire set down her supplies and walked toward the leopard, stopping a few feet away. I don't know if you're real, or if I imagined you. I don't know if you're someone's escaped pet or an actual wild snow leopard that had no business being in these mountains. I don't know if you led me to the mine, or if I'm just really good at finding patterns in chaos. Ghost's tail flicked once. But whatever you are, wherever you came from, thank you. You saved my life. You showed me the truth. You reminded me how to fight. Claire's voice broke. I won't forget you. The leopard held her gaze for a long moment. Then it turned and walked into the forest, pale form fading between the trees until Claire couldn't tell where leopard ended and snow began. She stood in the clearing for a long time, watching the space where Ghost had disappeared, feeling the ache of loss and the strange lightness of completion. When she finally turned back to the barn, she saw something in the snow she'd missed before. Paw prints, large and clear, leading from the forest to the barn entrance. But there, pressed into the snow beside the tracks, was something else. A feather. Long, white, pristine. Not from any bird, Claire recognized. Maybe not from any bird at all. She picked it up, turning it in her fingers, then carefully tucked it into her jacket pocket. A reminder, a token, proof that some things, the most important things, couldn't be explained or documented, or made to fit into the world's narrow definitions of possible. Spring came to the mountains slowly, reluctantly, winter giving up ground with sullen resistance. Claire spent those months transforming the barn from ruin to something that could, generously, be called livable. She hired local contractors, paid them well, and learned construction alongside them. The barn would never be beautiful, but it became solid, weathertight, warm. Dr. Chen's full geological survey confirmed everything Samuel Merrick had documented and more. The mineral deposits were extensive, valuable, and accessible without destroying the mountain's surface. Claire signed an agreement with an environmental mining company that paid her a percentage of extraction profits while guaranteeing strict conservation protections. The Merrick Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $500,000. Margaret served on the board. So did Dr. Chen. Their first case was helping a family in Montana fight a pipeline company trying to use eminent domain to seize their ranch. Claire split her time between the mountain and town, never quite comfortable in either place, but finding a rhythm that worked. The barn became her retreat, her thinking space, her reminder of how far she'd come. She never saw Ghost again, but sometimes, on clear winter nights, she'd hear something moving through the forest, something large and silent and impossibly graceful, and she'd step outside, breath fogging in the cold, and whisper thanks to whatever spirits watched over stubborn women and dying mountains. One year after buying the barn for $10, Claire stood in the clearing and looked at what she'd built. Not just the restored barn, though that was part of it. Not just the thriving foundation, though that mattered. Not just the protected land, though that was perhaps the most important legacy of all. She'd built a life, a real one, with purpose and meaning, and connection to something larger than herself. David would have been proud, she thought, or maybe he would have thought she was crazy. Probably both. Margaret drove up one afternoon in May, bringing lunch and news. The Montana family won, she said, spreading sandwiches on the barn's new porch. The pipeline company withdrew their eminent domain claim. First major victory for the foundation. Claire smiled, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. Samuel would be pleased. Samuel would be amazed. Margaret bit into her sandwich, gazing at the mountains. You know, when my grandfather told me about this place, about the promise he made, I thought it was just an old man's fantasy, a story he needed to believe. But you proved it real. The mountain proved it real, Claire corrected. I just paid attention. They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across distant peaks. Then Margaret spoke again, her tone careful. There's something I've been meaning to ask. The wildlife investigators came by the office last week. They wanted to know about the snow leopard, about whether you'd seen it again. Claire's hand went instinctively to her jacket pocket, where the white feather still lived, carried from coat to coat as seasons changed. What did you tell them? What did you tell them? That you reported seeing what you thought was a snow leopard when you first arrived, but that you were exhausted, possibly hypothermic, and under extreme stress, that you haven't seen any evidence of it since. And they accepted that? Margaret smiled slightly. They didn't have much choice. There's never been a documented snow leopard in this region. No tracks, no scat, no trail camera footage. As far as the official record goes, it doesn't exist. Claire looked toward the forest, toward the places where Ghost had led her. Maybe it doesn't, but you know better. I know the mountain provides what we need, when we need it. Samuel knew that too. Margaret nodded slowly. The mountain provides, and apparently, sometimes it provides in ways we're not meant to understand. They finished their lunch in companionable quiet. Two women separated by a generation but connected by the same stubborn truth. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed impossible. Epilogue. The new life. 2 years after the settlement, Claire stood in front of a crowd at the county courthouse. The Merrick Conservation Trust was being formally recognized by the state, its protections enshrined in law, 400 acres of mountain wilderness preserved in perpetuity, even as the careful, minimal mining operations extracted the valuable elements beneath. The mining company's first royalty check had been substantial enough to make Claire dizzy. She'd used part of it to establish a scholarship fund for geology students. Part went to expanding the Merrick Foundation's legal assistance program, and a small part she'd kept for herself. Enough to buy a better car, to renovate the barn properly, with real insulation and solar panels and a bathroom that didn't involve walking outside in winter. To live comfortably, if simply. She'd never gone back to the city. Couldn't imagine it now. After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated each other, Claire slipped away. She drove up the mountain road, properly maintained now, bridge rebuilt, and parked at the trailhead. But instead of going to the barn, she climbed higher, toward the mine entrance. The chamber had been sealed officially now, the samples removed to a university for study, the entrance protected as a historical site. But Claire had a key. She let herself in, flashlight illuminating the familiar stone walls. The hidden room beyond was empty now, its secrets surrendered. But Claire had brought something to leave behind. A letter, sealed in a waterproof container, addressed, "To whoever comes after," she wrote. "The mountain remembers longer than we do. It carries stories in stone and silence, waiting for the right person to hear them. If you found this, you probably need what's here. Don't be afraid to take it. Don't apologize for being desperate or broken or lost. That's when the mountain speaks loudest. Samuel Merrick left instructions for me. I'm leaving them for you. Document everything. Tell everyone. Make the truth too public to bury. Trust the mountain to provide, but do the work it asks of you. And if something impossible helps you, if an animal leads you or the forest speaks, or the stones give up their secrets, don't question it too hard. Just say thank you and keep moving forward. The land is protected now. The truth is recorded. Your job is to protect the next truth, whatever it turns out to be. Be patient. Be stubborn. Be brave." Claire Donovan, 2025. She placed the container in the hidden room's far corner, then sealed the entrance behind her. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber and deep purple. Claire stood on the ledge, looking out over the valley, over the barn nestled in its clearing, over the forest stretching away in all directions. Somewhere in those trees, maybe, a pale form moved through shadows, or maybe it didn't. Maybe ghost had never been real in the way the world demanded reality. Maybe the leopard had been exactly what Claire needed it to be, a guide, a guardian, a reminder that survival sometimes required believing in impossible things. She'd stopped trying to explain it to anyone, except Margaret, who understood that some mysteries were meant to stay mysterious. What mattered was this: she was alive, she was home, she was fighting for something that would outlast her. The mountain had provided, just as Samuel had promised. And when Claire drove back down to the barn that evening, when she built a fire and cooked a simple meal and sat on her porch watching stars emerge, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the absence of struggle. There would always be struggles, new fights, new challenges. The foundation had 3 active cases now. The mining company needed constant oversight. The trust required management. But it was peace earned through effort, held close through intention, protected by the knowledge that she had found her purpose in the most unlikely place imaginable. A broken barn, a dying leopard, a mountain full of secrets, and a truth too stubborn to stay buried. Years later, when journalists asked Claire to explain how she'd gone from homeless to landowner to conservationist, she always gave them the simple version: found the property at auction, discovered old documents, fought the corporation, won. She never mentioned ghost, never tried to explain the impossible, but sometimes, late at night, she'd pull out the white feather and turn it in her fingers, remembering golden eyes and pale fur, and the weight of a massive head pressed against her knee, and she'd whisper, "Thank you," to the mountain, and whatever spirits called it home. The mountain never answered in words, But sometimes the wind carried sounds like breathing, like footsteps, like the soft passage of something wild and free moving through the darkness, and that was answer enough. The snow fell differently in the third winter, softer, quieter, as if the mountain had finally learned to trust the woman who'd claimed it. Claire stood on the barn's reinforced porch, watching fat flakes drift through the beam of the new security lights she'd installed last fall. Not because she feared intruders, but because the foundation's work sometimes brought her home after dark, and the trail was treacherous when you couldn't see your footing. The barn barely resembled the ruin she'd bought for $10. The roof was solid now, professionally shingled. The walls stood straight, insulated and chinked. Solar panels angled toward the southern sky, feeding batteries that powered lights, a refrigerator, a laptop for the nights she worked from the mountain instead of the foundation's office in town. But she'd kept the bones of it, the original timber frame, the hand-hewn beams Samuel Merrick had probably cut himself, the wide plank floor she'd sanded and sealed but never replaced. The barn remembered what it had been, even as it became something new. Inside, warmth radiated from the wood stove. Claire had added a loft, accessed by a ladder, where she slept in a real bed with actual blankets, instead of a threadbare sleeping bag on frozen ground. She had running water now, piped from a spring she'd discovered and developed. She had a bathroom with a composting toilet and a shower that ran hot if you gave it time to heat. Civilization, carefully measured and grudgingly accepted. She'd kept the original corner where she'd first slept, though. Left it bare and untouched, a reminder, on the worst days, when foundation work overwhelmed her, or mining company negotiations stretched her patience thin, she'd sit in that corner and remember what desperation felt like. Remember why she fought. Tonight, though, she had company. Margaret's truck rumbled up the improved road, still unpaved, still rough, but passable now even in winter. The attorney emerged, bundled in a parka that made her look twice her size, carrying a bottle of wine and a thick folder that Claire recognized immediately. Legal documents. Always legal documents. "I brought the good stuff," Margaret called, holding up the wine. "You're going to need it." Claire smiled despite herself. "That good or that bad? Both." Margaret klimped up the porch steps, stomping snow from her boots. "Where's that coffee you're always bragging about?" Inside, Claire poured coffee while Margaret spread papers across the kitchen table Claire had built from reclaimed barn wood. The attorney's expression was complicated pride mixed with concern, excitement tempered by something heavier. "The Yellowstone case settled," Margaret said without preamble. "The ranching family keeps their land. The gas company pays damages and abandons the drilling project." Claire felt warmth bloom in her chest. "That's the 5th case this year. 6th. The Oregon timber dispute settled last week while you were up here playing hermit." Margaret's smile was genuine now. "The Merrick Foundation has a 92% success rate, Claire. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? We pick good cases. We pick impossible cases. And we win them because we have resources, expertise, and a reputation for not backing down." Margaret pulled out another document. "Which brings me to the problem." Claire sat down, cradling her coffee mug. "There's always a problem. We're running out of money." The words landed like stones in still water. Claire stared at Margaret, not comprehending at first. The mining royalties had been substantial. The settlement from Cascade had been invested carefully. The foundation's endowment should have been secure for years. "How?" Claire asked. Margaret pulled out a financial statement. "We've handled 23 cases in 3 years. We've provided legal representation, expert witnesses, scientific surveys, and direct financial assistance to families fighting corporations with unlimited resources. The Oregon case alone cost us $300,000 in legal fees and expert testimony." Claire studied the numbers, her stomach sinking. The foundation's balance had dropped from its initial endowment of $5 million to just under $800,000. At their current burn rate, They had maybe 18 months before they'd have to start refusing cases. The mining royalties, Claire started, are good, but they're not enough to cover this level of operation. We're doing the work of a major environmental law firm with a fraction of the funding. Margaret's expression softened. You've done something remarkable, Claire. You've built exactly what Samuel Merrick wanted, a way to help people fight back. But sustainable funding requires sustainable thinking. Claire set down her coffee, suddenly restless. She stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountain darkness. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need to expand the revenue streams. The mineral rights are valuable, but we've only developed a fraction of what's there. If we increase the mining footprint carefully, sustainably, the royalties could triple. No. Claire's response was immediate, visceral. Claire, I promise to protect this mountain, to develop it minimally, to keep it wild. She turned back to Margaret. If we expand mining operations, we become exactly what we're fighting against. We become Cascade Mining with better PR. Margaret sighed, clearly expecting this response. Then we need alternative funding, grants, donations, partnerships with larger environmental organizations, but that means oversight, boards, committees. It means losing the independence that makes the foundation effective. Claire felt trapped between two impossible choices: expand mining and betray the land's trust, or accept outside funding and lose control of the mission. There has to be another way, she said quietly. Margaret started to respond, then paused, tilting her head. Do you hear that? Claire listened. Outside, beyond the wind and the soft whisper of falling snow, something was moving, something large, pushing through the forest with deliberate, unhurried steps. Her heart rate spiked. Stay here. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped onto the porch, beam cutting through the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but trees and snow and shadows, then movement at the tree line, pale against the darkness. Ghost. The snow leopard stood at the edge of the clearing, exactly as it had 3 years ago, watching her with those impossible golden eyes. But it wasn't alone. Behind Ghost, partially hidden in the shadows, were 2 smaller forms, cubs, young, maybe 6 months old, pale and spotted, watching the barn with wary curiosity. Claire's breath stopped entirely. Ghost had cubs, had a family, and she'd brought them here. The leopard took 3 steps into the clearing, then sat, waiting. The cubs stayed hidden, uncertain, but their mother's posture was clear. Not a threat. An invitation. Margaret appeared beside Claire, wine forgotten. Oh my God, she whispered. Is that? Yeah, but there was never any proof, the wildlife investigators said. I know what they said. Claire moved slowly down the porch steps, flashlight lowered so it wouldn't blind the leopard. Ghost, what are you doing here? The leopard's ears flicked forward. Then it stood and walked toward the barn, not all the way, just close enough for Claire to see it clearly, close enough to confirm what she'd suspected the moment she saw those golden eyes again. This was goodbye. Ghost was leaving the mountain, taking her cubs somewhere safer, somewhere farther from human encroachment and mining operations and the slow creep of civilization that Claire's very presence represented. But first, the leopard had come to say farewell. Claire knelt in the snow, not approaching, just lowering herself to be less threatening. I understand, she said softly. You need to protect them. You need to go. Ghost watched her for a long moment. Then the leopard did something that made Margaret gasp behind her. It walked forward until it stood directly in front of Claire, massive and powerful and utterly trusting. The leopard lowered its head and pressed its forehead against Claire's, the way it had that first night in the barn when both of them had been desperate and broken. Claire felt tears freeze on her cheeks. She lifted one trembling hand and rested it on Ghost's neck, feeling the warmth, the reality, the impossible grace of this creature that had saved her life and changed everything. Thank you, Claire whispered, for all of it, for showing me the mine, for leading me here, for reminding me how to survive. Ghost pulled back, golden eyes holding hers for one more eternal moment. Then the leopard turned and walked back to her cubs, gathering them with soft sounds Claire had never heard from her before. Maternal, protective, completely wild, the three leopards disappeared into the forest, pale forms fading into shadow and snow. Claire stayed, kneeling in the clearing long after they'd gone, Margaret's hand eventually coming to rest on her shoulder. "That was real," Margaret said quietly. "I saw it. That was real. Yeah. And she had cubs. Which means there's a breeding population. Which means, don't." Claire stood slowly, joints protesting the cold. "Don't tell anyone. Don't document it. Let them stay ghosts." Margaret was quiet for a moment. If there's a viable snow leopard population on this mountain, the conservation implications are enormous. The protections we could mandate would bring researchers and cameras and tracking collars and all the human interference that drives them away in the first place. Claire turned to face her friend. "Ghost came to say goodbye, Margaret. She's leaving because, even with all our conservation easements and careful development, this place isn't wild enough for her anymore." The words hurt to say, hurt worse to mean. Back inside the barn, Claire poured herself wine instead of coffee. Margaret sat across from her, the financial documents forgotten. "She showed you something," Margaret said finally. "The same way she showed you the mine. What was it?" Claire stared into her wine, watching the reflection of firelight dance across the surface. "She showed me that I'm not protecting the mountain, I'm managing it. There's a difference." "Claire." "No, listen. I thought I was doing the right thing. Minimal mining, conservation, trust, keeping it wild. But Ghost is leaving, because wild doesn't mean carefully controlled. Wild means left alone, and I haven't left it alone." Margaret frowned. "You've protected 400 acres from complete exploitation. You've prevented clear cuts and strip mines, and I've turned it into a managed resource." Claire set down her wine. "The Foundation does good work, important work, but the money for that work comes from extracting minerals from the earth. We're just cascade mining with a conscience. That's not fair, isn't it?" Claire stood, pacing again. "Ghost showed me the mine when I was desperate, when I needed it to survive. But maybe that was never supposed to be the final answer. Maybe it was just supposed to keep me alive long enough to figure out the real solution. Which is..." Claire stopped at the window, staring out at the forest where Ghost had disappeared. "I don't know yet, but I know Ghost is right. I know the mountain is telling me something changed, and I need to listen." The vision. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat by the fire, Margaret snoring softly in the loft bed, and thought about snow leopards and sustainability and the difference between conservation and preservation. Just before dawn, clarity arrived the way it always did on the mountain, suddenly, completely, as if the answer had been there all along, waiting for her to see it. She woke Margaret gently. "I figured it out." The attorney sat up, disoriented. "Figured what out?" "How to fund the Foundation without expanding mining. How to protect the mountain and let it be truly wild." Claire's words came faster now, excitement building. "We close the mine." Margaret stared at her. "What?" "We close the mine, completely. Decommission the operation, restore the site, end all extraction." "Claire, that's suicide for the Foundation. The mining royalties are our largest revenue source." "I know. But they're not the only possible revenue source." Claire pulled out her laptop, opening it to a document she'd been drafting in her head for the past 3 hours. "What if we monetize the conservation itself?" "I don't follow." "Carbon credits, conservation credits, ecosystem services." Claire's fingers flew across the keyboard. 400 acres of intact mountain forest sequesters carbon, filters water, provides wildlife habitat. Those services have value. Real, quantifiable, marketable value. Margaret was fully awake now, leaning forward. "You want to sell conservation credits?" "I want to prove that intact ecosystems are worth more than extracted resources." The mining operation generates maybe $2 million a year in royalties. But 400 acres of old-growth forest, if properly valued for carbon sequestration, water quality, biodiversity preservation. Claire pulled up research she'd bookmarked months ago. Could generate 3 to 4 million annually in verified conservation credits. That's ambitious. It's possible. Companies pay for carbon offsets. They pay for water quality credits. They pay for habitat conservation to meet sustainability goals. Claire's excitement was infectious now. What if the Merrick Foundation became the model? What if we proved you could fund land protection by valuing the land itself, not what you extract from it? Margaret was quiet, her legal mind clearly working through implications. It would require certification, third-party verification, sophisticated monitoring systems. Dr. Chen could help with that. Her university could run the monitoring program, establish baselines, verify the credits. And it would require finding buyers, corporations willing to pay premium prices for verified conservation credits, which is easier than you think. Every major tech company is trying to achieve carbon neutrality. Every manufacturer needs water quality credits for EPA compliance. We have something they need, and we can provide it without destroying what makes it valuable. Margaret picked up her phone, already calculating. If we could generate 3 million annually from conservation credits, and we closed the mine, saving ourselves the compliance and monitoring costs, we'd have more money for the foundation, and the mountain gets to be wild again. Claire's throat tightened. Maybe wild enough that Ghost comes back someday. The attorney looked at her friend, seeing the determination and the grief and the hope all tangled together. This is going to be a lot of work. Certifications take years. Building a buyer network requires connections we don't have, and we'd need to keep the foundation running on reserves while we develop the new revenue model. I know, and there's no guarantee it works. This could bankrupt the foundation and leave you with a protected mountain you can't afford to manage. I know that too. Claire met Margaret's eyes. But Ghost didn't show me the mine so I could spend my life extracting wealth from the earth. She showed me the mine so I'd survive long enough to figure out how to protect what actually matters. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, the expression fierce and proud. Samuel would be proud of you. Samuel would probably think I'm crazy. He'd think you're crazy and be proud of you. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Margaret stood, reaching for her coat. I'll start researching conservation credit certification programs, and I'll reach out to some corporate sustainability officers I know. But Claire, this is going to take time. The mountain's been here for millions of years. It can wait a few more. The transition. The next 18 months tested every ounce of Claire's conviction. Closing the mining operation meant terminating contracts, decommissioning equipment, restoring the site. It meant watching the foundation's largest revenue stream dry up, while the new model was still theoretical. Dr. Chen's team conducted extensive baseline surveys, documenting everything from carbon sequestration rates to water quality to biodiversity indices. They installed monitoring equipment, established transects, created the rigorous documentation required for credit certification. Claire spent weeks in meetings with certification bodies, explaining and re-explaining why an intact mountain ecosystem should be valued as highly as agricultural carbon offsets or industrial pollution credits. The market doesn't work that way, one certifier told her dismissively. Companies want cheap credits. Forest conservation credits command premium prices only if they're preventing imminent development threats. The threat was imminent, Claire had replied. Cascade mining nearly strip-mined this entire mountain 3 years ago. We're preventing that permanently. It took 6 months, but they finally found a certifier willing to take the risk. The Merrick Conservation Trust became one of the first properties in the region certified for comprehensive ecosystem service credits. Finding buyers was harder. Margaret leveraged every connection she had, reaching out to tech companies, manufacturers, anyone with aggressive sustainability targets and deep pockets. Most were polite but non-committal. Carbon credits from tropical reforestation were cheaper, Water credits from agricultural best management practices were easier to verify. Claire started to worry they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then Dr. Chen published her research, a comprehensive study documenting the Merrick property's ecosystem services with unprecedented detail. The paper went viral in environmental science circles, picked up by mainstream media hungry for good news in climate coverage. Mountain conservation model shows intact ecosystems worth more than extraction. The headline ran in major papers. Claire did interviews she was terrible at, stumbling through explanations of carbon sequestration and biodiversity credits. But the message got through. Within a month, they had their first major buyer. A tech company looking to offset data center emissions offered to purchase 5 years' worth of carbon credits at premium rates. Then a beverage company bought water quality credits. Then a outdoor gear manufacturer seeking conservation partnerships. By the end of the second year, the Merrick Conservation Trust was generating $4 million annually from verified ecosystem service credits, more than the mining operation had ever produced. And the mountain was healing. With mining equipment removed and the site restored, the forest began reclaiming the disturbed areas. Saplings pushed through the old dig sites. Native grasses returned. The creek ran cleaner without sediment from mining operations. Claire walked the restored areas with Dr. Chen, marveling at how quickly the mountain could recover when given the chance. "Nature's resilient," Dr. Chen said, photographing new growth. "This will be old-growth forest again in 200 years, maybe sooner. Think there's a chance Ghost comes back." The scientist smiled. "If the ecosystem's healthy enough? Maybe. Snow leopards need vast territories, minimal human presence, and abundant prey. You're providing 2 of those 3. We can't control human presence completely. Too many people know about this place now." "No. But you've proven something more important. You've proven that protecting land can be profitable. That's the model that scales, Claire. That's what changes everything." The return. 4 years after buying the barn for $10, Claire received a call from a wildlife biologist with the State Department. "Miss Donovan, this is Dr. James Whitmore. I need to ask you about camera trap footage from the Merrick property." Claire's heart jumped. "We don't have camera traps on the property. Dr. Chen's monitoring team does. They're studying forest recovery." A pause. They captured something unusual. Claire drove to town, to the university where Dr. Chen's lab was located. The biologist met her there, a weathered man in his 60s with the careful manner of someone used to dealing with controversial data. He led her to a computer, pulled up a video file. This was recorded 3 nights ago, near the old mine entrance. The footage was grainy, infrared, but unmistakable. A snow leopard moving through the frame, pale and graceful, and utterly impossible. And behind it, barely visible, 2 larger shapes. Cubs, but not cubs anymore. Juveniles, nearly adult-sized. Ghost had come back. Claire's hand went to her mouth. She came home. "We've documented multiple sightings over the past month, Doctor," Whitmore said quietly. "All in remote sections of the property, areas with minimal human activity. Miss Donovan, do you understand what this means? It means the mountain is wild enough again. It means there's a breeding population of snow leopards in a region where they've never been documented." The biologist's excitement was barely contained. This could be a relict population, survivors of historical range that was thought extinct, or it could be natural range expansion. Either way, it's extraordinary. Claire stared at the screen, watching Ghost move through the forest with her offspring. The leopard looked healthy, confident, at home. "What happens now?" Claire asked. "Officially, I have to report this. Snow leopards are endangered. State and federal wildlife agencies will want to study them, protect them, by collaring them, tracking them, turning them into a research project." Dr. Whitmore's expression was sympathetic. "By establishing formal protections, preventing hunting, restricting development, creating buffer zones. The property is already protected. The Conservation Trust, isn't a federal wildlife designation. With formal endangered species protections, your property becomes critical habitat. Additional funding becomes available, but yes, it also means research access, population monitoring, potentially limited public education programs. Claire felt the old tension returning. Protection through management, conservation through control. Can I see the rest of the footage? Dr. Whitmore showed her hours of camera trap video. Ghost and her offspring hunting, resting, moving through the mountain like they'd never left. The juveniles were learning, growing, claiming their own territories on the vast property. In one clip, Ghost sat on a ridge overlooking the barn, staring directly at the camera with those golden eyes, staring at Claire across time and distance, saying something the biologist couldn't hear but Claire understood perfectly. Thank you. You kept your promise. The mountain is wild again. The choice. Claire called an emergency board meeting for the Merrick Foundation. Margaret, Dr. Chen, and 3 other board members gathered in the barn. Claire insisted on meeting there, on the land itself. Dr. Whitmore wants to formally report the snow leopards, Claire told them, which means federal protection, research access, the whole apparatus of wildlife management. Dr. Chen leaned forward. That's incredible for conservation. Endangered species designation could turn this place into a research station. Claire interrupted. Scientists tramping through Ghost's territory, helicopters doing population surveys, tourists trying to glimpse the rare leopards. Even with good intentions, it means the mountain stops being wild and starts being managed. What's the alternative? Margaret asked carefully. We don't report it. We claim the camera trap footage is inconclusive. We let Ghost and her family live here in peace, unknown and unmanaged. That's illegal, one of the other board members said. Failure to report an endangered species is a gray area when it's on private land with existing conservation protections, Margaret interrupted. Technically, we're not required to report wildlife sightings unless we're conducting activities that might harm them, which we're not. Dr. Chen shook her head. But this is too important not to share. A breeding population of snow leopards? The scientific value alone. The scientific value to humans, Claire said quietly. What's the value to Ghost? To her cubs? Does getting studied and tracked and managed help them, or does it help us feel better about ourselves? The room fell silent. Finally, Margaret spoke. What did Samuel's journals say? The last entry? Claire had memorized it long ago. The mountain keeps its own secrets. Someday, someone who needs it will find what we left behind. He trusted the mountain to reveal itself when the time was right, Margaret continued. Maybe we need to trust it to keep its secrets when that's what's needed. You're asking us to potentially break federal law, the board member persisted. To hide information about an endangered species. If this comes out, the Foundation loses all credibility. If this comes out, we tell the truth, Claire said, that we prioritize the animal's welfare over human curiosity, that we believed the best protection we could offer was anonymity, not management. Dr. Chen was struggling, her scientific instincts warring with her understanding of Claire's point. There's a middle ground. We could report it but advocate for minimal intervention, remote monitoring only. No collaring, no close contact research. Agencies don't work that way, Claire said. You know they don't. Once there's official designation, there's budget justification, career advancement, grant funding. The leopards become resources to manage, not wildlife to protect. The meeting lasted 4 more hours. Arguments circled, perspectives clashed, no easy answers emerged. Finally, Claire called for a vote. All in favor of formally reporting the snow leopards to state and federal wildlife agencies? Dr. Chen and 2 other board members raised their hands, all in favor of maintaining confidentiality, protecting the leopards through existing conservation measures. Claire and Margaret raised their hands. 3-2. Claire looked at the split board. I'm invoking my authority as trust founder and primary landowner, The leopards remain unreported. If anyone on this board feels they can't abide by that decision, I'll accept your resignation with gratitude for your service." Dr. Chen looked stricken. "Claire, I'm not asking you to lie. If directly questioned by authorities, tell the truth. But we're not volunteering information. We're not confirming sightings. The camera trap footage remains internal monitoring data, which is our right to keep confidential." The scientist struggled for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand your reasoning, even if I don't fully agree. But Claire, what happens when someone else sees them? When hikers or neighbors report sightings? Then we deal with it then. But at least we'll have given Ghost and her family time to establish territories, raise offspring, build a population, time to be wild without being watched." 5 years later, the Foundation had grown beyond anything Claire had imagined that first desperate night in the barn. The Ecosystem Service Credit Model had been adopted by conservation organizations across the country. The Merrick template, detailed monitoring, rigorous certification, premium pricing for verified conservation outcomes had become the gold standard. 23 properties in 7 states now used the Merrick model. Intact forests, restored wetlands, protected prairies, all generating revenue by being themselves instead of being destroyed. The combined properties sequestered millions of tons of carbon annually, filtered billions of gallons of water, provided habitat for countless species. The Foundation had handled 87 cases, winning 79. Families kept their land. Communities protected their water. Small operators survived against corporate consolidation. Claire spent less time on the mountain now. The Foundation needed her in town, meeting with politicians, speaking at conferences, building the network that allowed the model to scale. She had staff now, a real office, responsibilities that stretched far beyond the 400 acres Samuel Merrick had died protecting. But she still spent every free weekend at the barn, still walked the trails at dawn, still listened to the mountain's silence, and sometimes, if she was very quiet and very patient, she caught glimpses of pale forms moving through the forest. Ghost was old now, moving more slowly, but still magnificent. Her original cubs had established their own territories on the vast property, and there were new cubs, Ghost's grandchildren, learning to hunt in the shadows. The population was growing, slowly, carefully, in secret. There had been sightings by hikers, reported to authorities. The state had sent investigators who found tracks but no conclusive evidence. Claire had told the truth when asked directly. Yes, there had been camera trap images, but identifying species with certainty from infrared footage was difficult. Mountain lions, wolves, even large dogs could be mistaken for snow leopards by untrained observers. The investigators had left unsatisfied, but without enough evidence to pursue formal designation. Ghost remained officially non-existent, a rumor whispered among wildlife enthusiasts but never confirmed. Claire knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually, the population would grow large enough, visible enough, that formal protection would be necessary. But every year of anonymity was another year of wildness, another generation raised without collars and tracking devices and human management. It was enough. The legacy. On the 10th anniversary of buying the barn, Claire organized a celebration. Not for herself, she'd resisted Margaret's attempts to make it about her, but for the model they'd built, the movement they'd started. Representatives from all 23 properties using the Merrick template gathered at the barn. Families who'd saved their land, communities that had protected their resources, scientists documenting ecosystem recovery. Margaret gave a speech about Samuel Merrick, about the courage it took to hide the truth for 70 years, waiting for someone who would use it wisely. About Claire, who'd been homeless and desperate, and still chose to protect the mountain instead of exploiting it. Dr. Chen presented research showing that the combined Merrick model properties had prevented an estimated 40 million tons of carbon emissions and protected habitat for over 300 endangered or threatened species. Representatives from conservation groups and corporations that bought their credits spoke about the model's scalability, its potential to reshape how society valued intact ecosystems. Claire stood to the side, uncomfortable with the attention, grateful when the speeches ended and people scattered across the property, exploring the trails, marveling at how healthy the forest looked. As sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson, Margaret found Claire sitting alone on the barn's porch, staring at the tree line. "You did it," Margaret said quietly, sitting beside her. "You proved Samuel was right, that protecting land could be valuable, that the mountain provides." "The mountain provided," Claire corrected. "I just listened." "You did more than listen. You built something that's changing how we think about conservation." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Ghost was here last night. I saw her from the window, watching the barn. She's so old now, Margaret. I don't know how much longer. She's lived a good life, a wild life, because you made that possible, because she showed me how." Claire's voice cracked slightly. "I bought this barn to survive. I was so broken, so lost. And Ghost appeared like something from a dream and led me to exactly what I needed. Not just the mine, but the purpose, the fight. Do you ever regret it? Closing the mine, betting everything on an unproven model?" Claire thought about it honestly. "No, because the mountain is wild again. Ghost came back. Her grandchildren are hunting in forests that would have been strip-mined if I'd kept extracting minerals." She smiled slightly. "That's worth more than any amount of money." Margaret squeezed her shoulder. "Samuel would be so proud." Samuel was one man who couldn't beat the system, so he hid the truth and hoped someone else could finish the fight. Claire looked at her friend. "We didn't just finish it. We changed it. We proved there's another way." They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Around them, the party continued, voices carrying through the clear mountain air. Celebration, yes, but also commitment. Every person here represented a piece of land saved, a community empowered, a small victory against forces that seemed too large to overcome. Just before full darkness fell, Claire saw movement at the tree line. Pale forms, multiple now, watching the barn from the shadows. Ghost and her family, observing the strange human gathering in their territory. Claire raised her hand slightly, a greeting or a farewell or simply acknowledgement. Ghost's golden eyes caught the last of the light. Then the leopards turned and disappeared into the forest, silent as smoke, free as wilderness. Epilogue. The inheritance. 15 years after buying the barn, Claire stood in front of a new generation of conservationists at a conference in Seattle. Her hair had more gray now, and her face carried lines earned from years of difficult negotiations and harder choices. But her voice was steady as she told the story. She told them about being homeless, about spending her last dollars on a condemned property that nobody wanted, about a snow leopard that shouldn't have existed leading her to a truth buried for 70 years, about choosing to close a profitable mine to prove that intact ecosystems were worth more than extraction. The Merrick model now protects over 150,000 acres across 12 states, she said to the rapt audience. It generates $32 million annually in certified conservation credits. It's prevented an estimated 200 million tons of carbon emissions and protected habitat for over 800 species. She paused, looking out at the young faces watching her. But none of that matters as much as this. The mountain is wild again. The animals that call it home live without being managed or controlled, or turned into research subjects. That's the real success. Not the money or the model, but the wildness we protected. A hand raised in the back. "Miss Donovan, there are rumors of an unconfirmed snow leopard population on the Merrick property. Can you address that?" Claire smiled slightly. "The mountain keeps its own secrets. If there are animals living there who prefer anonymity, I think we should respect that. Not everything wild needs to be documented and studied. Sometimes the best protection we can offer is leaving things unknown." After the conference, Claire drove back to the mountain. It was a longer drive now. Seattle to the property was 6 hours, but she still made the trip at least once a month. The barn was maintained by a caretaker, a young woman studying conservation biology who lived there in exchange for managing the property monitoring systems. Claire had a house in town now, a real house with heat and plumbing and neighbors. But the barn was still home in ways that mattered more than comfort. She arrived after dark, the caretaker already asleep in the loft. Claire built a small fire in the wood stove and sat in her old corner, the place where she'd first slept homeless and desperate and certain her life was over. From her pocket, she pulled out the white feather. Still pristine after all these years, kept in a protective sleeve but carried always, proof of something she couldn't explain and didn't need to. The mountain was quiet tonight, snow falling in soft whispers. Claire closed her eyes, listening to the silence that had once terrified her and now brought peace. A sound outside, soft, deliberate, familiar. She opened her eyes. Through the window, illuminated by the barn's soft lights, Ghost stood in the clearing, ancient now, moving stiffly, her pale coat graying around the muzzle, but still magnificent, still wild. Behind her, a new generation, juveniles who'd never known captivity or collars or human management, free and fierce, and utterly themselves. Claire stood slowly, moving to the door. She opened it carefully, stepping onto the porch. Ghost looked at her across the distance, golden eyes dimmer now but still sharp with intelligence, and something that looked remarkably like affection. "Hello, old friend," Claire said softly. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again." The leopard sat, the same gesture from 15 years ago, patient, deliberate, full of meaning. Claire felt more than understood. They stayed that way for a long moment, woman and leopard, connected by something deeper than words or reason. Two survivors who'd saved each other, who'd proven that impossible things sometimes happened to people desperate enough to believe in them. Then Ghost stood, turned toward her offspring waiting in the shadows, and walked back into the forest, not fleeing, simply returning to where she belonged, to the wild mountain that was hers again. Claire watched until the pale forms disappeared completely. Then she sat on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, and let tears slide down her face. Not from sadness, from gratitude. For a $10 barn that became a home, for a dying leopard that became a guide, for a mountain that provided exactly what she needed, exactly when she needed it, for the chance to turn desperation into purpose, survival into legacy, loss into something that might outlast them all. The snow fell harder now, covering her tracks, covering Ghost's tracks, covering everything in white silence. By morning, there would be no evidence anyone had been here, no proof of the impossible moment that had just occurred, just the mountain, wild and secret, keeping its promises. Claire pulled out her phone, opening the voice memo app she used for notes. "Addendum to the Merrick Trust documents," she said quietly. "If anyone finds this after I'm gone, know that the mountain gave me more than minerals or money. It gave me purpose. It taught me that some things are more valuable protected than possessed, more powerful wild than managed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If there are stories about animals on this land, animals that shouldn't exist here, that can't be explained, don't try to prove them, or study them, or manage them. Let the mountain keep its mysteries. Let the wild things stay wild. That's the real inheritance Samuel Merrick left, and it's the one I'm passing on to whoever comes after." She saved the file, backed it up to the cloud, added it to the Trust's permanent documents. Then she went inside, built up the fire, and slept in her corner for the first time in years. Not because she had to, because she wanted to remember. Remember what it felt like to have nothing. Remember what it felt like to be saved. Remember what it felt like when the mountain whispered its secrets and trusted her to protect them. In the morning, fresh snow had covered everything. No tracks, no proof. Just Claire alone in a barn in the mountains. One more impossibly ordinary day in an impossible life. She made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and looked out at the forest that had become her purpose and her peace. "Thank you," she whispered to Samuel Merrick, to Ghost, to the mountain itself, for trusting me, for choosing me. for showing me what matters. The mountain didn't answer in words, but in the silence, in the pristine snow, in the wild forest stretching away in all directions. Claire heard everything she needed to hear. The mountain had provided, and Claire had protected what it gave her. That was enough. That was everything.